The cameras were not rolling. That was the detail everyone came back to afterward, that the loudest, most reckless thing anyone said on that soundstage all week was said with 2 cameras sitting dark on their tripods, 10 feet away, recording nothing. It was a working film set in the early 1970s, a converted warehouse on the edge of the city with concrete walls and a ceiling full of pipes and 40 people whose entire job was to wait. Grips, electricians, a camera operator, a script supervisor with a clipboard, stunt performers in dusty jeans standing in a loose ring around the marked-out floor. Between setups, a film set is one of the strangest workplaces on Earth. Everyone standing still, everyone bored, everyone watching each other, and all of it lit like a cathedral. 3 of the men standing on that floor could fight. Not movie fight. Fight. And that was the problem, because a film set is not built for men who can fight. It is built for men who can be photographed appearing to. The first was a karate man in a worn suede jacket, a tournament champion who had spent 30 years in jits and had the flattened knuckles to show for it. He had come to pictures late, and he did not pretend otherwise. He took the choreography seriously, learned his marks, hit them, and went home. On set, he was the quietest professional in the building, which some people mistake for softness. It is usually the opposite. The second was a big man in a dark blue shirt with his hair pulled back, brought in as a consultant on the fight sequences. He was enormous through the shoulders, and he moved well for his size, and by every account of the crew, he genuinely knew what he was doing. That was never the issue. The issue was that he had been on the stage 4 days and had spent all 4 of them explaining to the stunt coordinator, explaining to the director, explaining at lunch to anyone who did not walk away fast enough that what everyone in this business called martial arts was a costume, that tournaments were games with rules, that belts were jewelry, that none of it survived contact with a real situation, and that he was the only man on the payroll who had ever been in one. The third was a small man in a white t-shirt and black trousers who had said almost nothing all week. If you want to know why the smallest man on that soundstage was the one everyone was actually watching, stay with this, because he had been standing beside that camera for 4 days and he had not missed a thing, and leaning against a light stand at the edge of it all, with his arms folded and a cigarette he was not smoking, was the star of the picture. A lean, sun-weathered actor in a suede jacket of his own, a man who raced cars for real and had an instinct for authenticity so sharp it had made him rich. He had hired the consultant. He was beginning to regret it. The thing detonated over something small, the way these things always do. They were resetting a sequence. The karate man had suggested a change to the choreography, a small one, a repositioned block, because in the version they had rehearsed his hand ended up somewhere that would look wrong on camera. It was a craft note. It took 11 seconds to say. The consultant laughed. Not privately. He laughed so that the back of the stage could hear it, and he said that this was exactly the problem. He said the karate man was worried about how his hand looked. He said that in a real situation, nobody would care how his hand looked, because his hand would be somewhere on the floor with the rest of him. And the stage got quiet in that particular way. Stages get quiet, where 40 people all decide at once to become very interested in the equipment in front of them. The karate man did what he had done for 30 years. He let it go. He nodded once and turned back toward his mark. That was the mistake, not his, the consultant's, because a man who walks away is a man who has denied you your ending, and the consultant needed an ending. He crossed the floor in 4 steps, and he reached out and took a fistful of that suede jacket up near the collar, and he raised his other hand and put one finger up in the karate man's face, close the way you point at a child. And he said, loud enough for the light gantry, that 30 years of that karate was decoration, that it was useless, that it had never been tested, not once, not by anybody who meant it. Nobody moved. That is the part that is hard to explain to people who have never been on a set. 40 men, several of whom did that kind of work for a living, and every one of them froze because he was the consultant, and the star had hired him, and it was not their call, and the director was somewhere behind a monitor, and the stunt coordinator had gone very still with his mouth half open. On a film set, There is always someone whose job it is to stop a thing like this. That day there wasn't. The karate man did not swing. He did not grab the wrist. He stood there with a stranger's fist in his jacket and a finger in his face, and he looked at the man holding him with an expression the crew described afterward as almost sad, and he did not move a muscle. Anyone who understood what they were looking at understood what that stillness cost him and what it meant. It was not fear. He had made a decision in about a quarter of a second, and the decision was that he was not going to be the man who broke someone's arm on a soundstage in front of 40 witnesses because his pride had been insulted. And then a small man in a white t-shirt set down the pair of gloves he had been holding and walked over. He did not hurry. He crossed the floor at exactly the pace a man uses to go ask about the schedule, and the crew parted for him without any of them deciding to, and he stopped about 4 feet away, not squared up, not in a stance, just standing, hands loose, and he said one sentence, in a voice pitched so low that the men at the back of the stage had to reconstruct it later from the people who had been close. He said, "What would it take?" The consultant turned his head. He did not let go of the jacket. He asked, "What?" And the small man said, still perfectly pleasant, "What would it take for you to consider a thing tested? Because you have been on this stage 4 days and you have used that word about 900 times, and I want to understand it. Who does the testing? Where does it happen? Who watches? Tell me the standard and I will tell you whether he meets it." Here is the part worth staying for, because it was not a challenge, and everyone on that stage knew it was not a challenge, and that was precisely why it worked. The consultant had spent 4 days preparing for a fight that he never had to have, because nobody had ever asked him for the rules. He had built an entire argument on a word, and the small man had simply picked the word up and turned it over and asked mildly what was inside it. The consultant said something about real situations. The small man nodded, as though this were a reasonable start, and asked how many. The consultant said that was not the point. The small man agreed that it was not the point, and said so. He said, "No, you are right, it is not the point, and the number does not matter, and that is exactly what I am telling you." He said, "He has been hit 10,000 times by people trying to hit him. So have I. So probably have you." None of that is the argument. The argument is that you put your hand on a man because he made a note about camera angles. The consultant's grip was still in the suede. He looked for the first time in 4 days like a man doing arithmetic. And the small man said the last thing. He said it quietly, without any edge at all, and it was not about karate or aikido or tournaments or belts. He said, "Let go of his jacket, and I will show you anything you want to know. Keep holding it, and you have already told everyone here everything they need to know about you. Either way, the demonstration is finished. 10 seconds, maybe less." No one had touched anybody. The consultant let go. He let go the way men let go when the room has changed underneath them and they can feel it but cannot yet name it. He opened his hand and stepped back half a step, and his mouth started to shape something and then did not, because there was no version of the next sentence that worked. If he swung at the small man, he was a bully who had gone after the second smallest person on the stage after failing to intimidate the first. If he stood there, he was a man who had just been told, in front of 40 witnesses, exactly what he had been doing all week, in a tone of voice you would use to point out that his shoelace was undone. He had built the trap himself, 4 days of talking, 1 word at a time, and it had closed while he was still admiring it. The karate man straightened his own collar. He did not look at the consultant. He looked at the small man and gave him a nod so small that half the crew missed it entirely, and the crew members who had trained anywhere at all, understood that they had just watched one professional thank another for something that had nothing to do with fighting. Over at the light stand, the star of the picture unfolded his arms. He had not moved through any of it. He had watched the whole thing with the flat, evaluating attention of a man who had spent his life around people pretending to be dangerous, and had developed a very good eye for the difference. He walked over, past the consultant, as though the consultant were a piece of grip equipment, and said something to the stunt coordinator that the script supervisor heard and wrote in the margin of her notes, which is the only reason anyone knows it. He said, "We don't need the consultant on Thursday." That was all. No shouting. Nobody was fired in front of anybody. The stage simply went back to work, the way sets do, and the first assistant called the reset, and the grips started moving the light, and 40 people picked up the exact conversations they had been having 90 seconds earlier, as though nothing had happened. That is the strangest thing about a film set. It has no capacity for aftermath. There is always another setup. The consultant finished the day. He was professional about it, which surprised some people and did not surprise others. He gave one more note on a takedown, and it was a good note, and the stunt coordinator used it. And near the end of the day, when the small man was sitting on an apple box drinking water and reading something, the consultant walked over and stood in front of him for a moment, and then said, and the two grips coiling cable nearby both heard it, and both told it the same way for years. He said, "You didn't answer the question. You asked me what the standard was. You never told me if he met it." And the small man looked up and said, "I did tell you. He met it 4 days ago, every time you talked, and he didn't." Then he went back to his book. The consultant did not come back for Thursday. He worked for another 30 years and had a career most men would envy, and as far as anyone can determine, he never told this story to a single person, which is its own kind of testimony. The karate man never told it either. He was not the type. It came out the way things from film sets always come out sideways, decades later, from a grip at a reunion, from a script supervisor's margin note, from a stunt performer telling it to a younger stunt performer to make a point about how to behave. And every version, from every one of them, ended in the same place. Not with the finger in the face, not with the fist in the jacket, with a small man in a white t-shirt, setting down a pair of gloves and asking a question so quietly that half the stage did not hear it, and a big man's hand opening 10 seconds later, and 40 people going back to work as though the loudest argument of the week had never been had at all.